Alex Answer here, August 3rd, 2015, in the San Luis Valley. It is a movement. It is a off-the-grid movement. And while people are at different levels, some people are living in RVs, some people in motorhomes, some people physically living off the land, some people in the mountains, some people in the valley, some people above ground, some people below ground, some people that prefer to grow food, some people that prefer to hunt, some people that prefer to live their lives in a state of prayer and meditation. Different reasons, different folks, different backgrounds, different colors, different spectrums, different racial backgrounds. There is a off-the-grid movement that is now underway in the United States. For me, this is a place for me to develop some roots, but there are other places. And there are some places where perhaps some people may not want to live because for whatever reason it seems unattractive to them. This is actually what is valuable about certain properties where there aren't a lot of people. But also, reality is changing. The climate is changing. And here in Colorado, we've seen almost daily rains. We've seen enough rain to actually harvest and use for a garden, for an RV, for multiple purposes. And even though there is some air pollution, it's known by different terms, different names. It's far less here than some of the major cities. What I have been experiencing, what I've been learning the last couple of years, is how some people with certain, I guess you could say, issues, with life, emotional or mental, some of them have shown themselves to be very capable at living off the grid, at building their own home, at going out and hauling their own water, at growing huge marijuana plants or other plants, other gardens. But the innovative building that I've seen from people, like one guy building a home out of stone, it's very inspiring. And I want to talk a little bit about the different reasons why some people are going off the grid, because not everybody that's going off the grid is going off the grid because they're preparing for some major event. For some people, it's a spiritual experience to be close to nature. And it's important, I believe, for people to live at some point in their life free. So even if some people go off the grid and they have the experience and go back to the grid, that's still part of a healthy human lifestyle, to experience the meditation with the mountains, to experience, please excuse the wind, to experience the closeness with nature, to experience what it's like to get away from the electromagnetic frequencies of the city and people in general. It's also important for people to be able to mindfully deal with the silence in a healthy way and continue to work on their own spiritual development and not become too comfortable and end up in some sort of alternate universe or something related to virtual reality. Although I am all about the freedom to do as we wish. But getting back to why there is a off-the-grid movement. You have people in some cases that have been let go from their job, and they are tired of the anxiety of worrying about how they're going to pay their rent. They simply want to be free. Not live off someone else, but not live in the moment's moment of being homeless and being with less, especially in this particular society. And so people are making decisions for themselves to build their own home, to pay the sacrifice that comes, whether it be people hating on them or judging them, or living in harsher climates where it's hotter, no air conditioning, or living in environments where it's much, much colder. Here in the San Luis Valley, they can get below 30 degrees, but with a proper stove and a proper shelter, you can actually survive out here. I'm going to try to get to another spot where the wind will be less annoying. So I'm conscious of the fact that there's been some recent videos where the wind has created some sort of difficulty in actually hearing what's said. So in completing this thought, because everything said so far is important, there's a movement of people going off the grid for different reasons, whether they've lost their job or they've lost their wife or husband, whatever the case may be, or whether they've gone through a shift in consciousness where they no longer want to be someone else's slave, where they believe that their time is their property, their energy is their property, and people have a right to not let the system vampire on them. And there's a lot of ways in which they keep people in society. I've talked about running water, how a lot of people won't go off grid in some areas if the water isn't brought to them. And I think in that itself, we have identified how some people allow themselves to be dependent on the system indefinitely through this myth that unless there's running water, that they're going to turn into some sort of primate animal, and they're not going to be able to, unless they have like some free energy device off the grid, they would rather remain in the grid or in the city if they don't have running water. I think that's huge. And I think that we as sentient beings seeking to become more evolved spiritually, that we should ask ourselves, what does this really represent? And you can even look at the nature of water itself, because water is the source of, I don't know about all life, water is a source of a great deal of life here on earth. And it is very significant. And so when it comes to water independence, that's a pretty critical part of going off the grid. But there's many reasons why people are going off the grid, and I would say many come out to places like this in the San Luis Valley because they're seeking some sort of healing or epiphany. They're seeking to find the clarity in the madness of this world. And this is a place that can't provide that. There are other places that can't provide that. The fact is Native Americans did things like this before our culture became the dominant influence over our lives. And perhaps other cultures around the world have had their own rite of passages where people would gather knowledge from nature. And they would step away from the mass consciousness of even their day, hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago, even in the day of the Buddha, or at least the mythos or the story of the Buddha, and why he left the kingdom, and why he left, and what he was seeking when he basically walked away from the pleasures of the flesh. There are people today that are having parallel experiences. They're walking away from pleasurable things. And you know what I've also noticed? That actually seems to draw haters. I've seen channels where they talk about off-the-grid living and like hundreds of downs, thumb downs for someone trying to provide information. No need to argue with these people or even give them any attention. We're clearly seeing the sociopath within our own collective consciousness of humanity rise to the surface like an angry, evil spirit every time one of its prisoners escapes the complex. It like activates the Agent Smiths of this world. I've seen behavior like that on my YouTube channel, and I've clearly seen other people behaving this way on other YouTube channels. Instead of arguing with these people, actually understand what that energy represents. That's the energy of slavery that's almost channeling through those people that are upset that they haven't chosen to reach out for their own freedom. So it's not easy to reach out for your own freedom. There are people that may cast you out, even if you start truly thinking independently about things. I know a little bit about that. Some of my YouTube channel is about my survival story of dealing and living and coexisting in this world that is not very welcome to true, independent, organic, counterculture, truly radical, peaceful, intellectual, philosophical thought. Even though I can seem critical of technology at times, I'm using a little device right now that allows me to share this message with you and instantly upload this to YouTube without actually having to connect it to my computer. So I was having a debate with someone, and it's not that computers or technology is inherently evil, but ultimately it's how it's being used today. And the question is, do we use the technology mindfully to communicate a truth, or do we use the technology to just allow ourselves to be in this artificial virtual reality abyss to where that is our life, but outside of that, there is really quite a bit that probably needs to be built. There's a void there. And I think that even though we can use technology to share information, it's also important to be grounded with the physical world in a positive way instead of it being a negative way. And again, that's another reason why people are going off the grid. They're seeking to really reconnect with the earth. As I bring the conclusion to this video to the snow, a reconnection to the earth, something that we become disconnected with through our dietary habits, through our thinking, through the programming, through the public educational school system, through perhaps even trauma that we have been through our parents, and maybe really bad camping trips that we had growing up. And I notice sometimes when people go out in nature, some primal energies come out, including anger and fear and other things. And I think that that's natural, and that's part of the process. There's a process of emotional release. And it's important to look at nature as a way to heal ourselves and release stuck emotions, toxic emotions. It isn't that positive things are happening in the cities. There are definitely people in cities today doing amazing things, creating works of art, but they're doing that on a small scale. The cities ultimately are hives, which I ultimately, at this point, in this day and age, I will go on record and call them energy harvesting centers, these dense population centers. There's something going on in these large cities, and the behaviors of some of the people in mass consciousness is looking less human, in my opinion, but not only myself, others are noting this trend as well. And it's alarming some of us that are still in our heart, that still feel, that still have empathy. We're going, holy crap, what does this mean? So people are going off grid and they're going their own way, some single, some married, some young, some old, some black, some white, some Hispanic, some other. Oh, I've always loved being the other box. Some other. And it's going to keep happening. And at the same time, there are some people that I don't think are going to be called to the mountain. I think that they're going to continue to think that life is just fine where they are, so they'll stay where they are. They won't be having epiphanies in their mind. Hey, maybe you should go over here. Maybe your life would be easier. Maybe you would be happier, because they've chosen to not listen to that intuition that they've already possessed, that they've had this whole time, because I believe we all have that. They've chosen to block that with something, or a substance, or a thinking mechanism, or they've allowed something else or another entity to do their thinking for them. In a future video, I'm going to talk a little bit about, though, what I think is going on today in terms of spiritual warfare. But to conclude this, it's people regrounding to the earth and seeking their own sovereignty. The whole off-the-grid thing is really just a cover for something far more spiritual and deeper that relates to reclaiming the sovereignty of our very soul. But in some ways, we have to actually manifest that in the physical plane to manifest that in the spiritual.